Well, I was cleaning up these battery terminals. I looked at that one, and I think I'm just going to put a battery in this one since it's sweating battery acid through the terminal. Even though this battery reads good, I'm going to say it's a goner. Let me grab a battery for this fella. So this is an early 2004 Ford Excursion, same as the F-250 kind of, and the F-350 with the 6-liter diesel. This one was towed in to us by a local resident who said he spent 4 months doing research and decided to let us have a crack at it. His battery, the terminal, was leaking battery acid through it, so I decided to go ahead and just put a battery in this side. The other one tests good. If we need to replace it, we already have authorization from him to do so. He said these batteries have been sitting for a couple of years. So I was like, alright, well, we might need to start there. We're going to go ahead and get these battery terminals all cleaned up, spread out properly, because these, you can see, are crushed all the way down tight, which they're not supposed to be like that. It's been buckled over itself as well, so we'll straighten these out as good as we can to make them work correctly. We want to install them so that they're engaged entirely, nice and clean for good connectivity. I can already see it's got some oil leaks on the top of the intake. More than likely, once we get this thing running, we'll need to do a oil cooler, which we will verify that from our data when we get it driving and we run it down the road. Basically, our engine oil temperatures and our engine coolant temperatures will be drastically different than one another. And when you get close to 20 degrees difference, you're kind of on borrowed time before the oil cooler ruptures and fills your entire cooling system with engine oil. You don't want to have that happen. I usually use the Ford replacement coolers. I don't really like aftermarket stuff in any way on these trucks. This truck has 260,000 miles on it, and the owner says he has never had injectors put in it, so he got his money's worth out of those injectors for sure. Let me get this battery stuck down in here and hooked up. We'll crank it over, we'll see what it sounds like. Might be able to see this, but the battery terminal is sticking up past the top of the battery connector, so I can tighten that down. And you don't have to like go straight ugga-dugga on these. They just need to be tight enough that they won't rotate. That's tight enough. Now the 6-liter diesels get a pretty bad rap, a lot of which was due to improper tuning and programming back in the early days. There are some inherent problems that were known by International when they were put into service. That's a different story. But pretty much all of those things, now that we're 20 years into these things running, all of the bad things we know about these engines, for the most part, can be remedied. And that's a good thing. These are actually pretty good, reliable engines once you have the problems solved. My 05 flatbed that we run all over the country has 417,000 miles on it now. And that engine's, I don't believe that engine's ever been out of the rails. It's got about 70,000 miles on the transmission. When I bought it with 360,000 miles on it, it had a brand new Ford service replacement transmission in it. So that transmission's, you got 90,000 miles on it now, but those 5R110s are actually very good transmissions. I like them a lot. Ooh, that's dry. That's not a good sign. Well, let's see if it'll crank over and see what it sounds like while it's cranking over. Oftentimes you'll want it to sound smooth when it's cranking over. Otherwise, if it's got a dip or a change in RPM, it might have a dead cylinder or a blown head gasket. So let's crank her over and see what happens. I'm going to go ahead and say that this thing has got a blown head gasket. I'm going to stick another battery in the other side and see if we get it cranking over faster. And then we'll probably put it up in the air and take an oil sample out of the bottom of the engine to see if it's full of coolant. Ooh, those are heavy. Try and fire it up again.
Good afternoon, I'll start motor being speaking. Chris, do you want the master bleed kit for the air bleeds on? This is awesome. Question is the fuel all algaed up in this.
I'm actually going to pull the filter and check the filter, but it's not cranking over fast enough, so there's multiple questions. It's got oil in it, the oil doesn't look bad, but the oil's technically over full, so I'm going to try and roll it back onto the rack and put it up in the air and take an oil sample. And I'm going to check this fuel filter real quick, see if we have fuel, because that's a question I need to answer. But it's definitely cranking over super slow.
Yeah.
We got fuel. It's not filthy. Contaminated. It's actually a good sign. A lot of times these filters are super neglected and they're just black as tar. Good news is we have fuel. I will be putting new filters in it, even though they're not dirty, but if the seals leak because they're old, we'll have issues that we'll have to address. We definitely have a little cooler oil leaks. Let's pop the belt off and we'll see if we've got a seized up accessory. It's not a bound accessory. So we have fuel. We kind of have combustion. You can actually hear it when it's cranking, that it speeds up and then it slows down. It'll hit, spin, hit. So it's got a dead cylinder. There's no coolant in it, or at least there's no coolant in the tank. So I'm going to drain some coolant out of the bottom, drain some oil out of the bottom, see if I have oil, coolant in the oil. It doesn't appear that I have oil in the coolant, so that's a good sign. But more than likely, the heads are going to need to come off of this with mileage, a set of injectors, a whole bunch of gaskets and seals. But my Fickum is working. I'm going to check my IPR. Unfortunately, it's not cranking really fast enough, so I may need to do a 6.4 starter upgrade to it to really get it spinning faster. Because the starter with 260 on it might be the original starter and it's just worn out. that's basically the next step we need to go to. I can roll it over by hand and verify the engine rolls over like I feel it should, and if so, then we'll put a starter on it to get it spinning faster. When I get the rack set up, we'll get it over hopefully on the rack in a manner that I can put it up in the air and not have to crawl around on my back like a working girl. Looks to have a leaking pinion seal. Our sway bar is intact. Shocks have been replaced. These Excursions come with a poly fuel tank, so we don't have to worry about fuel contamination issues. Rear U-joints look alright. Probably oil dripping back. Starter's been replaced. That's not a good sign. Don't have any exhaust leaks there. If you look way up in there, you can see there's soot all over up there. So we've got an exhaust leak. And that guy right there is probably part of our exhaust leak, so the rear turbo up pipes need done. Valve cover's leaking. Oil pan and oil pan separator plate are probably leaking. All the tie rod ends have been replaced at some point. The ball joint's been replaced. This U-joint's been replaced because it has a grease fitting in it. They don't have a grease fitting in it from the factory. And the ball joints don't have grease fittings in them from the factory either. This side, you can see how it's all wet right here, so the inner axle seal is leaking, causing this wetness. But this side's going to need an inner shaft as well. You can see what that yoke looks like. Well, this yoke, somebody's put a bead of weld around that U-joint to keep the end cap in. And they did on this side too. And you can see that is an original U-joint, and it's somebody tried to weld it back into the thing. That's new. That's a special repair. These shocks have been replaced as well. But the shock bushings are actually dry rotted, so I would recommend a set of shocks. U-joints, inner seals. 20 years old, so probably going to be doing hoses if he decides to fix this engine. The front brakes look like they were done right before he parked it as well. Calipers are ancient. It needs tires. These things are dry rotted and gross and old. I wonder what year they are. Oh yeah, those rotors sound amazing. 2011. Tires from 2011. They're only 12 years, about 13 years old now. Sadly, this one's got the dreaded Excursion rocker rust. This is what makes most people not fix these trucks, is the rust. Things considered, this one's actually not too bad. Not horrible. This truck's actually fixable. Well, needs a steering dampener. I guess I should write all this stuff down. Links have been replaced. They're not the greasable ones, but they've definitely been replaced. And more exhaust soot all over the top of the trans. So we know we have an exhaust leak, turbo boost leak. we get oil. Oh, we're getting oil. Oh. It's got some moisture in it, but it's not gross. Alright, I'll take that. I'm going to plug the block heater in. Plug the block heater in, warm up the oil so it'll crank faster. And we'll check back on this in a little bit. You know what? I should probably check. These have a lower fuel filter that sometimes don't get changed. And that can cause all sorts of problems. I should probably check that before I drop it down. But I'm going to plug in the block heater to warm up the oil. Get this thing cranking over faster. Now we do a lot, or at least we used to do a lot of 6-liter diesels. Here in Ohio, salt kind of beats these things up. So, but we've had people bring them to us from out of state. We fix them up, never see them again. I want to check to see what my IPR is reading, but I really need to warm this thing up because it's like 20 degrees out today and 260,000 miles without the block heater plugged in. This thing is really, really angry. So now I have communication with my scanner. An error occurred, yes, I'm aware. Nothing. So more than likely it needs a high pressure oil pump, an ICP and an IPR. And those parts were leaking. I gotta ask this guy if he wants to, how far does he want to go, because like the 260,000 miles, I'm going into the intake valley. Might as well put head gaskets and head studs on it. Bulletproof diesel EGR cooler. And then you'll have a nice reliable truck. So let's see what he wants to do. He's got a pretty good idea what this thing needs at this point. So we're going to have a little powwow with the customer and see what he wants to do and how he wants to do it. We're going to give him some recommendations on how we would do it, which would be just to go in once and do it all. But not everybody wants to do that, so we'll see. Oh, are you kidding me? Just broke. Another $500 payment to snap on.